The story features an ordinary, under-talented high school loser trying his best to prepare for national exams. But as he struggles to concentrate and study, the colleagues are just joking and talking about a recent string of murders that have been happening in the city. Apparently, whenever a victim is killed, people report seeing petals at the scene. Therefore, everyone begins to believe that these petals may have something to do with the serial killer, but Toya couldn't care less about that. Shortly after, the professor enters the room and asks for the class's attention, as he would like to introduce a new student. However, when he calls her, she simply ignores the teacher and the entire class, walking directly towards Toya and introducing himself as Rado. The story has no idea why this random girl is so interested in him, but he knows better than to get involved in crazy protagonist stuff, and she clearly looks like a main character. So, he responds disinterestedly and goes back to studying. The girl sits next to him and doesn't say anything else during class. However, when classes end and Toya is going home, she appears again, climbs the railing next to him and does a backflip, completely unnecessary. Toya is confused, as he still doesn't understand why this student transfer is so interested in him. Before he can even process this, the girl grabs his face and looks straight into his eyes. This scares him, so he pulls away and says he needs to go to the cram school, leaving quickly. As he leaves, the girl calls someone named Neumann and says that she was right about the look in Toya's eyes. With that simple sentence, Toya officially enters the plot without having any way to escape it. Now, meanwhile, in a dark alley in the city, a disturbed man attacks a woman with a butcher knife, saying that he will make a beautiful meal with she. Coincidentally, this alley is close to the cram school that Toya attends. That is, things are no longer looking good for him. Toya is sitting on a bench in front of the cram school, looking at the results of your last mock test. To be honest, they are not bad. He has an average of 70%, but this is far from enough in the Asian educational system. Frustrated, he throws the papers outside and sits there, wishing he had some kind of talent, literally anything, if it meant he didn't remain useless for the rest of his life. Sky. So there's no point in just wanting. At the same time, near that alley, 2 police officers arrive to investigate, as some people reported hearing a woman's screams, but they still haven't heard anything, found nothing. Suddenly, a man comes hunched over in a corner, and they assume he is just drunk. One of the police officers approaches to check if he is okay, but, to his horror, realizes that the man is eating the human remains of the woman from before and seems proud of it. The policeman immediately understands that he is not in his right mind and pulls out his gun, ready to shoot if he make any suspicious movement. Shortly after, Toya is walking home and passes through the same alley. The first thing he sees are the decapitated bodies of the 2 police officers, while the insane man is there laughing non-stop. And so, Toya is officially dragged into the plot at ow. That moment, then you appear out of nowhere. Upon seeing Toya's expression, she asks if he is feeling jealous. She explains that when people witness someone's talent, they typically feel one of 3 things: admiration, fear, or envy, and believe that someone like Toya, who has always wanted so much to have a talent, must being jealous at that moment. Toya still tries to understand the whole situation and how Raito knew he would be there, but then the man notices both of them. Apparently, he has a certain history with Raito. He says that it was thanks to her that he managed to awaken his talent, and that he is deeply grateful for that. However, demonstrating his distorted gratitude, he declares that he will make her his next meal. He advances against the 2, but even looking directly at them, Ado manages to grab Toya and hide behind a pillar before the knife even touches the ground. Apparently, this maneuver was possible thanks to Newman's calculation predictions, but Newman warns that Aito needs to solve this quickly. So Aito gives Toya his cell phone and asks what he would do if an item existed capable of allowing someone to instantly acquire the talents of their past lives. For someone like Toya, this seems like a dream come true. But there's a catch. The item is a blade, and to get the talent, you have to act like a depressed emo teenager. In other words, it's not exactly ideal. When the man finally finds them, then you cut her own throat, suddenly activating the talent from her past life as a kunoichi. At that moment, Toya notices flower petals falling around her. Before he can ask, the man attacks, forcing Aito to defend himself with his swords. While the fight takes place, Neumann speaks to Toya on the phone and explains that through the branch of reincarnation, it is possible to recover talents from past lives. Those who have achieved reincarnation are called returners, and as returners, both Fish and Rado are capable of performing superhuman feats, which is already quite obvious. History still doesn't understand what the petals are, so Neumann continues his explanation, saying that the petals are proof that someone has recovered a talent from a past life. Even geniuses, most extraordinary people end up dying one day, and when that happens, they receive a new life. However, through reincarnation, it is possible to access the abilities of the past. But just because someone was talented in another life does not mean that he was a good person, and that is how people like fish arise. Both good and bad people can awaken talents from past lives. However, there is also the possibility that someone was completely useless in their previous life, in which case, attempting reincarnation simply results in death, meaning that if Toya tries to use this, there is a high chance of him dying. Then Neumann asks if he is still so desperate to get a talent. She thought he would be scared and refuse, but she completely underestimated how insane he may be. Meanwhile, Aito continues fighting fish and says he is disappointed because someone who supposedly possesses the talent of a legendary swordsman is showing very good skills. Underwhelming Aito takes offense to this and decides to use one of his strongest moves, the cut of the 8 colored corpses. At first, it seems that Fish is prepared, as he manages to block one of the attacks, but he forgets the other 7 and ends up being torn to pieces, remaining only his petals that disperse in the wind. After confirming that he was defeated, then you go back to get his blade, but realize that Toya has disappeared. When asking Neumann where he went, she explains that he took one of the reincarnation blades and ran away. Then you are relieved because you were worried that he wouldn't have the courage, but that was exactly the result she expected. In Toya's room, we see him covered in blood after cutting his own throat while losing consciousness. He has a vague dream about a mysterious man with white hair. When he opens his eyes again, it's morning, and there you are in your room. He asks what she is doing there, but then notices her hand covered in dried blood. Then you reveal that he has become a returner with success, although she moaned a lot in her sleep, so she asks what that was. Sometime later, the two are sitting on a bench in the park, and Toya says that she had an older brother called Supper, who was good at everything. Everyone admired him for being a prodigy with a bright future, while Toya was ignored for being completely average. Everything he did was compared to brother's exceptional performance, and just for not winning a race at age 6, his father called him a disappointment. Since then, he has become obsessed with reaching the level that Supper set. But despite for all the talent Seiya had, he was extremely weak in health and ended up dying. Toya's parents blamed him for his brother's death and kicked him out of the house. Since then, he has tried to prove his worth acquiring a talent of his own. Hito understands the reason for his despair, but in fact, it goes even deeper, because Toya tried to learn all kinds of skills and was never good at them. Hito says that she understands how he feels, because in some ways she is just like him. Toya is confused by this statement and is about to ask her what she means, when she receives a message from Neumann asking her to go there. A few minutes later, they arrive at Neumann's room, and just by looking at it, you can tell that she never leaves the house, mainly because she can't walk. Toya recognizes his voice as the one from the previous call, and Hito asks where the others are as the place seems empty. Explains that everyone is on missions to eliminate evil returners, as that is their main function in the so-called Forest of the Great. For these dangerous individuals to emerge occasionally, it's up to them to eliminate them before they do damage, as Fishface hopes Toya will also participate. Surprisingly, he is quite accepting of the idea of having to kill other people in his life. First official mission, he will be accompanied by Rado to face an evil returner named Vlad. However, Neumann says he doesn't want to be killed immediately, which leaves Rado confused, as that's her job. But Neumann explains that she wants to gather information about Vlad's talent, so they only need to keep him busy for 10 minutes before eliminating him. She also mentions that the mission will take place in 2 days, because before that they need to test Toya's returner ability. That same night, Toya goes out looking for an opportunity to use his power. He sees a thief who has just stolen a girl's purse as she runs after him. Then Toya decides that this is the perfect opportunity. Ironically, his talent is called Arm Thief's Right, and as expected, it is a skill aimed at theft. So, when the thief runs past him, Toya manages to reach the girl's bag and remove all her belongings, as the criminal runs away completely without realizing that the bag is now empty. And when the girl gets to Toya, she starts yelling at him for not stopping the thief when he had the chance. The story goes that there is no need to worry because he got all of her things back. The girl is initially grateful, but soon remembers that the bag was a Birkin, and that the bag itself is worth much more than what was inside, so she goes back to running after the thief. Toya's ability has an effective range of 70 centimeters, which is a big disadvantage, since it has no obvious combat capabilities. But if he can get close enough to activate it, he can break the laws of physics and steal anything within reach, regardless of physical obstacles. Its effectiveness is not limited to objects alone, as in that brief moment, it can also steal blood from the thief's veins, causing him to fall to the ground. At first glance, this power seems evil, but while Toya not using him for bad purposes is okay. A change of scene, Toya and Aito were looking for the target in the middle of the forest, when after some time, Aito finds Vlad and they both prepare to fight. However, Vlad conjures spikes that appear all over the ground, and Aito barely manages to dodge and counter each one using his style and the bite an item. Seeing the situation getting complicated, Vlad warns who is useless and continues attacking, while the Count challenges him to see how long he can resist. Then, Aito retreats and climbs a tree, commenting to Newman that he won't be able to gain much time without approaching, asking him to wait and concentrate on analyzing the data, since the enemy was waiting for them and any carelessness would be fatal. Although Rado disagrees with waiting, as the stakes could come from any direction, the Count realizes that something is being planned. Newman asks Toya to hurry, and Rado's attitude may be linked to the sword he carries, in addition to his taste for fighting. Konde strikes the ground with his staff, raising countless stakes that advance against Raito, who uses the 8-colored corpse to cut everything along with the tree and goes on the attack, ignoring the wear and tear. But this time, she fails to cut the blades and ends up injured, leading Newman to declare the mission a failure and order the retreat, although Toya does not obey. When the Count already considered himself victorious, a hand crosses his chest. It was Toya, who after 10 minutes managed to use his power, where he falls, but gets up laughing when he realizes that Toya is recently reincarnated and has not yet mastered his talent, promising to execute them until a voice tells him to retreat. A dark mist takes place, with eyes in the air, warning Toya not to move, making the Count obey and call that presence Lord, before disappearing, allowing Neilman to complete the mission and order the retreat. Later, Toya, alone, reveals that the Count sought to, recover what was stolen, his talent, and deduces that this was kept secret, since a reincarnated person without talent would be a disgrace. Then he uses his power again, the thief's loot, eliminating the Count with his own daggers and stating that he will use that talent in unimaginable ways, making it clear that he doesn't care about helping humanity, and who intends to steal all talents, whether from heroes or sinners, until he becomes the most talented in history and surpasses his brother, believing that in the end he will be the one who has the last laugh. The next day, Neilman comments that he woke up before the alarm even went off and finds it strange that he stayed up late studying again, as his performance on the tests has been slow. So he asks Neilman what he has on the agenda for the day, and she replies that it will be the extermination of the evil returners. However, before that, there is a place he needs to go with her. They go to a gym, and Newman starts shouting that it's time to get up. Then, we see Aito sleeping on the floor. She thanks them for coming over to wake her up, while Neilman calls her sloppy Aito, explains that she couldn't wake up alone because she spent the whole night training. Neilman comments that the two are very similar, and tells Raito that her talent far surpasses anything that can be achieved only through training. However, Aito counters that it takes 1,000 days of training to develop and 10,000 days to perfect. In the middle of reasoning, Neilman interrupts and tells them to stop talking, as it's time for the mission. Neilman then explains that the target's name is Gase, a serial killer nicknamed the Killer Clown, who dresses like a clown to attract young victims and murder them. She warns that they have already entered his territory and asks them to separate at his signal. After counting down, she orders them to disperse. They separate, dodging a surprise attack from the clown. The enemy welcomes the two, calling them samurai and thief, saying that they really entered there just as someone else had prophesied. Aito activates his talent immediately. The clown realizes that she is a close-range fighter, believing that this will not be a problem, as it would be enough to keep his distance. However, Aito advances quickly and practically cuts him in half in a single blow. Enuma starts to complain, asking why she eliminated him so quickly, since the plan was to allow Toya to gain experience. Aito apologizes, saying he didn't know he was so weak. Soon after, several soldiers appear in the forest and tell them to change the focus of the mission, now ordering the capture of the two rookies, as need to find out the truth behind the Petals. At night, we see a person named Edward trying to escape from Aito. He praises your skillful movements, but states that this will not be enough. Suddenly, several apples begin to fall from the sky, and one of them stops in front of you, activating a gravity ability that presses him against the ground. Still, he manages to get up and continue running. At the top of a building, two people observe the scene. The so-called Applehead is impressed that he has managed to escape, while the girl next to him tells him not to get so excited. Still, he claims that now it's her turn to shine. She responds that she's not the fighting type, but reveals that her talent is spatial translocation. Then she teleports behind the criminal and rips off one of his arms. Applehead asks why she didn't rip his head off, and she explains that the soldiers are the ones who should kill him, not her. So, the soldier puts the gun to Edward's head and says it's time to surrender. However, Edward pulls out scissors and pierces the soldier's eyes, saying it's time to run away. However, he ends up getting shot and wonders what happened, since the soldier should be dead. However, the soldier also has a talent that turns him into a skull. Later, more soldiers appear, saying that he is completely surrounded and that there is nowhere to escape. Rado, the teleport girl, and the Applehead also join them. Edward then realizes that they are part of the organization that targets the evil returners, and kneels waiting for their death. Afterwards, everyone goes to Newman, who congratulates them on the beautiful work. Einstein then hands over the man's dagger to Newman. Hiroshinal asks if anyone is injured. The man with the skull talent says he has been injured, and she heals him quickly. The Applehead almost blurts out that he would like to having been injured, but realizes he is speaking too loudly, and calls Ein to take care of the witnesses. Rito goes to Toya and tells him he should join them, asking what he is doing, explains that she is adjusting the position and wiring of the monitors. She comments that he finally got the talent he always dreamed of and still chose to stay there doing tasks for Newman. So, he explains that he enjoys these types of tasks. Newman says that there are not many people as diligent as Toya and states that he has been a great help. We see several people there, and Newman comments that there are still some members missing. Then you comment to Toya that everyone there is like him. It was their own resentment that led them to look for talent. Applehead says that if he needs any help, just talk. So he goes to Toya and says that he doesn't agree with his presence because his talent isn't one of the great ones. She too claims that his talent is evil, saying that they cannot trust him. However, Newman says that he may have revived the talent from his past life, but that does not mean that it has become the same person. Still, Emma is not convinced, so Ida hugs her and tells her not to be so stubborn because Toya has her endorsement. Emma responds that she will let it pass for now. Already on the way to home, they talk about how they felt about being treated as inferior for not having talent until they notice someone at Toya's house. Here we meet Itsuke, an extroverted old friend of Toya's. Toya, someone as talented as his brother and leader of Japan's Special Forces unit. They ask what he came to do there. Itsuke replies that he came to see how Toya was doing, since he wasn't there, was going to school. But when you see him with his girl, you imagine he went on an adventure. They are both embarrassed and deny it. Then Itsuke shows a photo of when they met. He says that Toya the pursued on her own trail, but always ignored him because she had other things to do, something that seems to be the fate of. The talented Emma gets angry at this and cuts herself with a branch. Demonstrating his talent, Itsuki seems unimpressed. It turns out that he already knows everything about the branch and calls him pathetic for depending on the past. Then you shout at him to shut up, pointing his sword, and says that he doesn't know anything about them. Itsuke replies that they are just excuses. This irritates her, and she lunges at him, but he avoids it and pins her to the ground. After that, he was about to leave, but before tells the protagonist that it's a shame what he's become. Toya calmly turns around, stating that one day he will surpass his brother with that power. On the street, Itsuke encounters a squad of soldiers. They address him as captain and ask if they should start the operation. Itsuke denies the order and orders them to leave. He then gets into a car with a man called Yoshiki, who teases him for leaving those very interesting targets. They escape by returning to the protagonists. Aito is crestfallen at having been defeated so easily. She tells the protagonist about her past, how she was abandoned in an orphanage, grew up isolated from her others because of her appearance, but one day she met her master who welcomed her and taught her the way of the sword. However, she had no talent for it, and, wanting to make her master proud, she sought different ways to improve, finding the branch of reincarnation. But this brought misfortune, because during a duel she injured her master and through her fault, the dojo ended up being closed, causing the others kicked her out. Still, she doesn't intend to stay still. You need to return to your master to reopen the dojo. Therefore, you need to become a full returnee as soon as possible. Returning to Itsuke, he remembers Toya's words, cursing Chaya for dying and leaving that problem behind. Sheik is surprised, especially since Chaya actually predicted what would happen. Back to the protagonists, Newman explains about the complete returnees. Different from the ones we know in the cabin, Toya and Rado have a time limit. This limit disappears the more. Sometimes you reincarnate. Therefore, those who completely reincarnate are called by their previous names. This is why some call Raito Musashi, but she will not return to the dojo until she feel complete. Now, in the gym, Toya trains with the Count's daggers. He shows this to Ito, who praises him for having incredible talent, although he also deduces that he can steal his talents. Friends, Still, she says she would do the same, and so she supports him. Furthermore, she appreciates the fact that Toya disconnected Newman so that only she would know about it. So this also bothers her, as he didn't try to steal her talent when he had the chance, as if she had no value. Therefore, he promises to become so strong that he will want her talent. Therefore, Toya promises to gather talents that rival hers, and they both make this promise until the day they face each other. Well, if you've made it this far, comment on the word apple so I know you've made it to the end.